Jack Reacher had no plans, which was the only plan he ever had. The bus ticket had appeared in a P.O. box he used for occasional correspondence in Des Moines. A one-way ticket to a place called Redemption, Nebraska. Tucked inside the folder was a single, neatly typed note. They know what you did in '97. Come alone. Reacher didn't have many secrets from 1997, but the ones he had were buried deep. This wasn't an invitation. It was a hook, baited with a piece of his own history. A trap. He knew it was a trap. But a trap only works if you don't know you're walking into it. Reacher knew, and that made all the difference. He folded the note, pocketed the ticket, and got on the next bus heading east. Redemption, Nebraska, was exactly the kind of place people came to forget or be forgotten. A single main street, a diner with a buzzing neon sign, a courthouse with a fresh coat of white paint, and an unnerving sense of quiet. The people who passed him on the sidewalk nodded, their smiles tight and their eyes lingering a moment too long. They weren't just curious, they were expectant. They were waiting for him. He checked the time on a bank clock, 3:14 in the afternoon. He'd been in town for less than 10 minutes. He needed coffee. The diner was called The Daily Bread. He pushed the door open, a small bell announcing his arrival. Every head in the place turned. The conversations didn't stop, but they faltered, the rhythm disrupted by his presence. He took a stool at the counter. A waitress with tired eyes and a name tag that read Sarah approached him. "Coffee?" she asked, her voice low. "Please," Reacher said. "Black." She poured it from a glass pot that had been sitting on the burner for too long. He didn't mind. He wasn't here for gourmet coffee. He was here to see who would make the first move. He took a sip, the bitter liquid scalding his tongue. He scanned the room in the reflection of the chrome napkin dispenser. A handful of locals, farmers by the look of their hands. A couple of men in cheap suits at a corner table, trying too hard to look casual. They were watching him. Reacher was halfway through his cup when the bell on the door jingled again. This time, two men in sheriff's department uniforms walked in. The bigger of the two, with a thick mustache and a weary expression, had Sheriff Brody stitched over his pocket. The younger one was a deputy, eager and nervous. Brody didn't scan the room. His eyes went straight to Reacher. He walked over and stood behind him. "You the new arrival?" Brody asked. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of authority. "Looks that way," Reacher said, not turning around. "Mind if I see some ID?" Reacher slowly placed his cup down and turned on the stool. He met the sheriff's gaze. "I'm not carrying any." "No name?" "Reacher." Brody nodded, as if the name meant something to him. Maybe it did. "There's been a disturbance over at the old mill. A man's been killed. A witness saw someone matching your description leaving the area about an hour ago." Reacher had been on a bus an hour ago, miles from Redemption. The trap was springing, right on schedule. It was clumsy, obvious, almost insulting. "I just got to town 10 minutes ago," Reacher said. "The bus from Omaha. You can check the schedule. Check with the driver." "We will," Brody said. "But for now you need to come with us, just to answer a few questions." The two men in suits at the corner table stood up. They weren't cops, but they moved with a purpose that suggested they were part of the play. They positioned themselves by the door. Reacher looked at Brody. He saw a man following a script, his eyes betraying a deep unease. This wasn't Brody's operation. He was just a pawn. "All right," Reacher said, standing up. He was a head taller than Brody and outweighed him by a good 50 pounds of muscle. The deputy took an involuntary step back. "Let's go answer some questions." The sheriff's station was small, clean, and smelled of stale coffee and pine sol. Reacher was put in an interrogation room, a steel table, 3 chairs, a one-way mirror on the wall. He sat down and waited. He was an expert at waiting. After 20 minutes, Sheriff Brody came in and sat opposite him. He slid a thin folder onto the table but didn't open it. "The victim's name is Albert Hayes," Brody began. "He was the town's planning commissioner, killed with a single blow to the back of the head, blunt force trauma. The weapon was a length of steel pipe. We found it nearby. Wiped clean, of course. Of course, Reacher echoed. A witness, a local woman walking her dog, saw a man leaving the mill. Tall, big build, dark hair. Didn't see his face, but the description is a good fit for you. You're the only new person in a town of 800 souls. It makes you stand out. I was on a bus, Reacher repeated. The driver's name was Earl. He had a coffee stain on his shirt shaped like Florida. He was listening to a country station. The song playing when we pulled in was about a broken-down truck. Brody just looked at him. We're trying to locate the bus driver. He finished his route and went off shift. Convenient. So, Reacher, Brody leaned forward, his voice dropping. Why did you come to Redemption? Nobody comes here by accident. I got an invitation, Reacher said. From who? It didn't say. Brody sighed, a long, weary sound. He looked like a man who hadn't had a good night's sleep in a year. Look, son, the evidence is circumstantial, but it's all pointing at you. The town's most powerful citizen, Mr. Thorne. He was a close friend of the deceased. He's demanding action. My hands are tied. I have to hold you. Thorne. Reacher said the name slowly. It felt heavy, important. Who is he? Marcus Thorne. He owns the agricultural processing plant just outside of town, employs about half the people here. His family basically founded Redemption. He's influential. And he was the one pulling the strings. Reacher was certain of it. The anonymous note, the murder, the perfect witness, the pressure on the sheriff. It was all too orchestrated. The question was why? What was the connection to 1997? They led him to a cell. It was solid concrete and steel. A cot, a toilet, a sink. The door clanged shut with a sound of finality. Reacher lay down on the cot, hands behind his head, and stared at the ceiling. He wasn't a prisoner. He was a piece on a chessboard, placed exactly where his opponent wanted him. Now, he just had to figure out the rest of the board. He spent the next 2 days in the cell. The routine was monotonous. 3 meals a day, slid through a slot in the door. The food was from the diner. Sarah, the waitress, was the one who delivered it. The first few times, she didn't meet his eyes, but on the second day, as she passed him his lunch tray, her fingers brushed his. Tucked under the sandwich was a small, folded napkin. Reacher waited until he was alone. He unfolded it. A single line was scribbled in pencil. Thorne's father was Colonel David Thorne. Died in Leavenworth, 99. And there it was, the final piece of the puzzle. Colonel David Thorne, 1997. The mission in Bosnia. A smuggling ring, moving weapons to insurgents. Thorne was the ringleader, a decorated officer selling out his own people for profit. Reacher had been the one to investigate. He'd unraveled the whole thing, quietly, efficiently. Thorne was court-martialed and sent to the military prison at Leavenworth. He'd died of a heart attack 2 years later. Now his son, Marcus Thorne, was running an entire town, and he had a score to settle. This wasn't just about revenge. Framing him for murder was too simple. Thorne wanted something more. He wanted to break him. Reacher knew he couldn't wait for the system to work. The system was owned by Thorne. He had to get out. That night, he put his plan into action. He used the metal spoon from his dinner tray, slowly, patiently, working at the crumbling mortar around the toilet's base. It was old plumbing, a weak point. After hours of grinding, he'd loosened it enough. With a final bracing heave, he ripped the toilet from the floor, the ceramic cracking under the strain. Water flooded the cell floor. The night deputy, the nervous young one from the diner, came running. "What the hell?" he shouted through the bars. "Plumbing issue," Reacher said, standing over the mess. The deputy hesitated, then fumbled for his keys. Protocol said never to enter a cell alone, especially with a prisoner like Reacher. But he was young and the mess was spreading. He made the wrong choice. He unlocked the door and stepped in, nightstick drawn. "Stay back," he warned. Reacher didn't move. He just waited for the deputy to step onto the wet floor. As the kid's leather-soled boots hit the water, Reacher kicked his feet out from under him. The deputy went down with a splash, his head hitting the concrete with a sickening crack. He was out cold. Reacher took his keys, his weapon, and his wallet. He locked the unconscious deputy in the cell and walked out the back door of the station into the cool Nebraska night. He was a fugitive now. The game had changed. He needed a place to lie low, to think. He thought of the note from the waitress, Sarah. She had taken a risk. That meant she was either brave or desperate, maybe both. He headed towards the diner. The lights were off, but a dim glow came from an apartment window above. Reacher scaled the fire escape, his movements silent and sure. He peered through the window. It was a small, tidy apartment. Sarah was sitting at a table, a book open in front of her, but she wasn't reading. She was just staring into space, her face a mask of worry. He tapped lightly on the glass. She jumped, a small cry escaping her lips. Her eyes widened in fear when she saw him. "It's okay," he mouthed through the glass, holding up his hands. "I'm not going to hurt you." She stared at him for a long moment, a battle of fear and indecision playing out on her face. Then, with a deep breath, she walked over and unlatched the window. "You're crazy," she whispered as he climbed inside. "They'll tear this town apart looking for you." "That's the idea," Reacher said. "I need information, Sarah. Why did you help me?" She sank back into her chair. "My brother worked at Thorne's plant," she said, her voice barely audible. "He found out something was wrong, about the finances, about shipments that didn't add up. He started asking questions. 2 months ago, he died. They said it was a car accident, drunk driving. But my brother, he never drank. Not a drop." Reacher nodded. It was a familiar story. Thorne wasn't just a vengeful son. He was running his own criminal enterprise, just like his father. Redemption wasn't a town. It was his private fiefdom. Albert Hayes, the planning commissioner, must have stumbled onto something too. "Thorne owns everything," Sarah continued. "The sheriff, the judge, everyone is either on his payroll or too scared to speak up. He brought you here for a reason, didn't he? It's some kind of show." "Something like that," Reacher said. "His father and I had a history. He thinks he's hunting me. But he made a mistake. He brought the fight to his own backyard." Reacher stayed in her apartment for the next day, a ghost in the small town. Through the window, he watched Thorne's response. The sheriff's department was out in force, but they were quickly supplemented by a new group. Men in black SUVs, wearing tactical gear, private security, mercenaries. They moved with a cold, professional efficiency that local cops couldn't match. Thorne was escalating. He wanted Reacher found, dead or alive. Sarah was his eyes and ears. She brought back whispers from the diner. Thorne had put a bounty on his head. $50,000. Every citizen in Redemption was now a potential informant. The town was a cage, and the bars were closing in. "You can't stay here," Sarah said, her voice strained with worry. "They're starting to do door-to-door searches." "I don't plan to," Reacher said. "It's time to stop reacting and start acting. Thorne's plant. That's his base of operations. That's where the truth about your brother is. And it's where this is going to end." "It's a fortress," she warned. "Fences, cameras, guards everywhere." "Every fortress has a weakness," Reacher replied. He looked at a map of the town Sarah had. The plant was on the outskirts, near the river. Isolated. Perfect. That night, under the cover of a moonless sky, Reacher moved out. He went through backyards and alleyways, a shadow among shadows. The mercenaries were patrolling the streets, their search patterns systematic. Reacher observed them, learned their timing, their routes. They were good, but they were predictable. They were looking for a panicked fugitive. They weren't prepared for a hunter. He reached the perimeter of the plant, a 12-foot chain-link fence topped with razor wire, a single access road heavily guarded. Reacher ignored it. He followed the fence line to the back, where it bordered the thick woods running along the riverbank. He found what he was looking for, a drainage culvert that ran under the fence and emptied into the river. It was narrow, dark, and filled with stagnant water, but it was a way in. He slid into the cold, murky water and pulled himself into the concrete pipe. He moved through the suffocating darkness, the only sound the drip of water and the pounding of his own heart. He emerged on the other side, inside the compound. The plant was a maze of warehouses, silos, and processing facilities. Guards patrolled the grounds, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Reacher moved with practiced stealth, using the massive structures for cover. He knew Thorne wouldn't be on the factory floor. He'd be in the administrative building, the nerve center of his empire. He found it easily. It was the only building with all the lights on. He located a service entrance at the back, picked the simple lock, and slipped inside. The building was quiet, the air humming with the sound of computers. He was in a hallway lined with offices. At the far end, a large set of double doors, Thorne's office. As he approached, he heard voices from inside. Thorne was not alone. Reacher didn't knock. He kicked the door in. The scene inside was just as he expected. Marcus Thorne was sitting behind a massive oak desk, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He was younger than Reacher expected, in his late 30s, with cold, intelligent eyes and an arrogant smirk. Standing near him were two of his professional soldiers, weapons raised. Sheriff Brody was there too, standing off to the side, his face pale, his expression one of defeat. Thorne's smirk widened. "Reacher, I knew you'd come. Predictable. You wanted my attention," Reacher said, his eyes scanning the room, assessing the threats. "You've got it." "I wanted more than your attention," Thorne said, taking a slow sip of his whiskey. "I wanted to prove a point. My father was a great man, a patriot. You destroyed him. You ruined our family name. I built all this from nothing, to reclaim that name, but it wasn't enough. I needed to destroy you, to show the world that Jack Reacher, the legend, could be broken." "Your father was a traitor," Reacher said, his voice flat and hard. "He sold weapons to men who used them to kill American soldiers. He died in prison because he was a criminal, not because of me." Thorne's face tightened with fury. "Lies! You fabricated the evidence." "Your father confessed," Reacher said. "It's all in the record. He just wasn't man enough to tell his family the truth." "Enough talk," Thorne snarled, nodding at his men. "Kill him." The two mercenaries moved to flank him. They were well trained, but Reacher had spent a lifetime fighting men like them. The first one came at him with the butt of his rifle. Reacher deflected the blow, grabbing the weapon and twisting it, using the man's own momentum to slam him into the wall. He was down. The second one fired, but Reacher was already moving, using the desk for cover. He came around the other side, low and fast. He drove his elbow into the man's throat, a swift, disabling blow. The guard choked, dropping his weapon and collapsing to the floor. It was over in 5 seconds. Now it was just Reacher, Thorne, and the sheriff. Thorne looked shocked, his arrogance evaporating into pure fear. He fumbled in his desk drawer, pulling out a pistol. "Stay back!" he screamed. Before Thorne could aim, Sheriff Brody moved. He drew his own weapon with surprising speed and pointed it squarely at Thorne. "It's over, Marcus," Brody said, his voice shaking but firm. "I've let you run this town for too long, no more." Thorne stared at him in disbelief. "You? You work for me." "I work for the law," Brody said. "I should have remembered that sooner." Thorne hesitated, his eyes darting between Reacher and Brody. He saw no way out. In a final act of desperation, he turned the gun on himself. But Reacher was faster. He crossed the room in 2 long strides, his hand clamping down on Thorne's wrist, squeezing until the bones ground together. The gun clattered onto the desk. Reacher twisted his arm behind his back, forcing him to his knees. "It's not that easy," Reacher said quietly. "You're going to answer for what you did, for Albert Hayes, for Sarah's brother. You're going to face the system you thought you owned." The aftermath was quiet. With Thorne in custody, his empire of fear crumbled. Sheriff Brody, a man reborn, began the long process of cleaning up his town, starting with the mercenaries and the corrupt officials on Thorne's payroll. He found the files in Thorne's office that detailed the smuggling operation and proved the murders of Hayes and Sarah's brother. Reacher didn't stay to watch. He found Sarah at the diner early the next morning. "It's over," he told her. "Brody has everything he needs." Tears of relief streamed down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "How can I ever repay you?" Reacher just shook his head. "Just make good coffee." He walked out of the diner and down the main street of Redemption. The sun was rising, casting a warm glow on the town. The people he passed on the street no longer looked at him with suspicion or fear. They just saw a man passing through. He reached the highway on the edge of town and stuck out his thumb. He didn't know where the next car would take him, and he didn't care. The trap had been set, and he had escaped, but more than that, he had dismantled it, piece by piece, leaving something better in his wake. He had left justice, and for Jack Reacher that was enough. He had no plan, and that was the only plan he ever needed.